He thought his badge made him untouchable. But one woman, with nothing but the truth, tore his world apart in court. What she revealed shocked the entire room, and it only gets darker from there. He thought his badge made him untouchable, until he brought the wrong woman to court. Detective Carl Rayner walked into the courtroom like it belonged to him. His boots echoed against the marble floor. The badge on his belt gleamed under the overhead lights. He adjusted his collar and smirked. Another day, another win. He had built his reputation on intimidation and precision. No loose ends. No one dared question his version of the truth. Until today. The woman sat quietly at the plaintiff's table. Her name was Mara Kincaid. She wore a gray blazer, simple, sharp, no makeup, no emotion. But her eyes, those eyes burned with a quiet storm. Carl barely glanced at her. To him, she was just another nuisance, a civilian who refused to stay in her place. He took the stand with confidence, feeling the wood beneath his palm as he swore the oath. His voice rang clear, direct, practiced. He told the jury about the night of the raid, how Mara had interfered with a lawful investigation, how she had resisted, how she had threatened an officer. All lies, but well-crafted lies. He watched the jury. They nodded. They believed him. Then Mara stood. She walked to the center of the courtroom. Slow, measured. She pulled a remote from her bag. Clicked once. The courtroom screen flickered on. Grainy footage appeared. Surveillance from across the street. Muted, but clear enough. Carl shifted. His fingers twitched. There he was, on screen, dragging a man out of a house, slamming him to the pavement. No resistance. No weapon. Then came the sound. Raw. Unedited. The video played with audio. Carl's voice exploded into the room. You think anyone will believe you? I write the report. I am the law. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Whispers. Frowns. The judge leaned forward. Carl's face flushed hot. His throat tightened. Mara did not flinch. She stared at him like she had been waiting years for this moment. She clicked again. A second video. Body cam. Carl's own partner had leaked it. Time-stamped. Synced. The footage showed Mara standing back. Hands raised, pleading. Please, he is not armed. He cannot breathe. Then Carl's voice again. Back off, lady. Unless you want the report too. The silence that followed was colder than steel. Carl looked around. The jury was stone. His attorneys sat frozen. Even the bailiff took a step away. His badge felt heavier now. Sweat slid down his spine. Mara stepped closer. No anger in her voice. Just truth. You thought no one was watching. Carl opened his mouth, but no words came. He tasted copper. His own fear. He had built walls with his lies. But Mara had come with light, and every wall was glass. The judge cleared his throat. Slow, grave. Detective Rayner, would you care to explain this footage? Carl stood. His knees buckled slightly. The room swayed. He reached for the rail to steady himself. Eyes bore into him from every direction. The prosecutor looked stunned. The jury leaned in. He opened his mouth again. Dry. Hollow. I cannot confirm the authenticity. Objection! Mara snapped. Her voice rang like a bell in a storm. She was calm, but her words cracked through the air. The footage is time-stamped geotag and verified by a forensic analyst. She turned to the jury. Every frame is real. The judge nodded. Objection overruled. Carl felt the weight of it settle, like chains coiling around his chest. His badge no longer gleamed. It looked dull, fake. His pulse pounded in his ears. A steady, angry drum. He looked back at the screen. The images looped. Every lie, every shove, every sneer, exposed. He remembered that night now. Not the way he told it in his report, but the real way, the way Mara remembered. He remembered the man's eyes, wide, pleading, terrified. He had pressed his knee into the man's back, harder than necessary, for longer than necessary, because he could, because no one ever stopped him. Until now, he remembered Mara's voice that night too, how she begged him to stop, how she tried to pull the man to safety, and how he shoved her back like she was nothing. His own words came flooding back. "You got a mouth on you, lady. Careful you do not choke on it." Now he was the one choking on truth, on guilt, on fear. The judge leaned forward again. "There will be a recess. Bailiff, escort Detective Rayner to holding." "No." Carl barely whispered it, but it echoed. "No, wait. You do not understand. I have served this city for 20 years. The bailiff moved toward him. Carl backed away. His voice rose. 20 years. I have made enemies. I have kept scum off your streets." The courtroom remained silent, unmoved. Mara's face never changed. Not smug, not cruel, just resolute. The bailiff grabbed Carl's arm. Firm, not violent. But there was no room to negotiate. For the first time, Carl realized what that grip meant, what it had meant for the people he had dragged from their homes, what it meant to be powerless, to be seen, judged, stripped. His badge was removed, not ceremoniously, not respectfully, just plucked off like an old sticker. The metal clinked on the desk. He stared at it, cold, lifeless, not a symbol anymore, just an object. Mara watched as he was led away. Her hand stayed folded, still, strong. No celebration, only justice. Outside, the clouds had gathered. The sky rumbled low. Thunder rolled across the city. Carl passed reporters with his head down. No statements now. No confidence. Just sweat and shame. Mara stepped outside minutes later. A light drizzle kissed her face. It felt like release, like truth washing the air clean. She had waited 3 years for this moment. 3 years of appeals, of threats, of silence from people who knew the truth. 3 years of being called a liar, unstable, emotional. But truth had a way of surviving, of crawling through cracks, of gathering its own voice. Now it spoke in surround sound, in courtrooms, in headlines, in whispered apologies. The city could not look away anymore. Inside the courthouse, the judge reviewed the case file again. New charges would come, a full investigation. Carl was not the only name in those files. Others had signed those reports. Others had watched and said nothing. The system had protected itself until someone pulled the curtain back and showed the audience the wires. Carl sat in a holding cell. The bench was cold. The walls felt too close. He leaned forward, head in hands. He saw the faces, the people he had silenced, the ones he had humiliated, the ones he had destroyed with a few strokes of a pen. His power had always come from fear. Now he felt that fear, in his bones, in his breath. The same fear he once fed others. Back in the courtroom, Mara collected her things. She paused at the badge, the one they had taken from him. She stared at it for a long second, then turned away, leaving it behind, letting it sit where it belonged, alone, forgotten, stripped of its illusion. As she stepped outside, the rain grew heavier, but she did not rush. She welcomed it. The world around her felt louder now, clearer, the sound of traffic, of footsteps, of justice finally moving. And somewhere in the city, a door creaked open. Another witness, another truth, another reckoning, waiting to be heard. The hallway outside the courtroom was nearly empty. Mara's footsteps echoed against the polished floor. Each step fell heavier, not from exhaustion, but from the weight finally lifting. Her spine stood straighter. Her breath came easier. She reached the lobby, where a small crowd had gathered. Some were reporters. Others were strangers, people she did not know, but their eyes met hers with something different. Not pity, not suspicion, recognition. A woman stepped forward, middle-aged, tight grip on a leather purse. "I saw what he did to my son," she said quietly. Her voice trembled. "But I never thought anyone would stand up." Mara nodded. Nothing needed to be said. The woman squeezed her hand. A quiet thank you, a shared ache. Mara stepped into the rain. The courthouse loomed behind her. Its columns now looked less invincible, less eternal, a place like any other, built by men, capable of rot, capable of renewal. She walked to the edge of the steps, looked up at the gray sky. Raindrops ran down her cheeks. Cold, real. She did not wipe them away. Behind her, someone called her name, Ms. Kincaid. She turned. A young reporter stood there, soaked and shivering. "Do you have a statement?" Mara shook her head. "No. Let the footage speak." The reporter scribbled something anyway, but Mara was already walking, down the steps, into the city. Her city, not his anymore, not Carl Rayner's. She passed a bus stop where a boy leaned against a shelter. His hoodie was damp, his shoes were torn, but when he saw her, he straightened. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not from knowing her, but from knowing what she had done. She nodded once, a quiet message. Keep watching, keep speaking. The courthouse doors slammed behind her as officers let another man out. Not Carl, someone else. Another name on the list. The building groaned, as if it could feel the pressure mounting. Inside, investigators opened sealed boxes, folders with red tape, files with matching stories, identical handwriting, identical cover-ups. The badge had made Carl untouchable, until it did not, until Mara stood up, until truth pierced the silence. He sat now in a different kind of silence, one with no exit, no illusion, only reflection, only consequence. A fluorescent light flickered above his cell, buzzing, relentless. His palms were sweaty, his thoughts louder than ever. What would happen next? Who else would speak? What records would be pulled? Names whispered in locker rooms now sat in open folders. People he had once called friends no longer returned his calls. He was no longer useful, no longer safe. He stared at the gray wall. Time passed differently now. There were no meetings, no urgent calls, no power, only the sound of his own breath, the sound of waiting, waiting for trial, waiting for justice. Across town, Mara sat in a cafe, a quiet place, wooden walls, muted jazz. The waitress smiled gently, offered her coffee, free of charge. She took it with a nod. Steam curled from the rim. She watched it rise, then fade. She opened her laptop. A new file, a new folder, labeled Truth Part 2. There were still names, still reports, still others who needed to be heard. This was not the end, just the beginning. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then began to type, each word careful, measured, laced with purpose. Outside the window, a cruiser rolled by slowly. She looked at the officer in the front seat, young, unsure, but watching. The cruiser kept moving. No siren, no glare, just movement. Change, slow as it was, had begun. She returned to her writing. The names of victims, the dates, the details buried in cold reports. Misconduct phrased as procedure, force labeled standard. But the words were unraveling now, thanks to one voice, and the thousands that echoed behind it. Back and holding, Carl sat alone. He could hear the echo of keys, footsteps down the hall, doors opening, doors closing. He imagined the headlines. Decorated detective faces charges in civil rights violations. He imagined the interviews. His old captain denying any knowledge. His former partners distancing themselves. The internal memos. The sudden reassignments. It was all happening, and nothing could stop it. He looked down at his hands. They had once held so much authority. Now they trembled. Now they waited. A guard passed his cell without looking in. He was no longer someone worth seeing. No longer someone to fear. Outside, the rain lightened. The streets shimmered. Mara closed her laptop and stood. Paid for her drink anyway. Even free things had cost. She stepped out into the street again. This time, she turned left. Not toward home, but toward the neighborhood where it had all started. The block where the raid had happened, where the lie was born, the lie that tried to bury her. Now she would walk it again, not to relive it, but to reclaim it. The sidewalk glistened. A child played in a puddle nearby. His laughter cut through the gray. She smiled. The badge had protected Carl Rayner. but it had not protected the truth, and it would not protect the next one. Not anymore. Not with her watching. Not with the world beginning to listen. The neighborhood looked almost the same. Same corner store. Same chain-link fences. Same cracks in the sidewalk, like veins through the concrete. But something felt different. Lighter. More aware. Mara walked past a building with a faded mural. A dove chipped at the wings. A boy stood beneath it, tossing a tennis ball against the wall. He looked up at her, paused, then tossed the ball again. She remembered that sound, that rhythm, the same sound from the night of the raid. The ball had been bouncing when the cruiser lights spilled across the street, when Carl Rayner and his team moved in. Fast, loud, without warning. No knock, no warrant in hand. Just orders, just force. Mara crossed the sidewalk where it had happened. The house was still boarded up. Curtains torn. Graffiti sprayed across the door. A silence hung there, like it remembered too. She stood in front of it for a long time, not moving, not blinking. The wind brushed her face, carried the smell of wet pavement and old brick. She closed her eyes. She heard it again, screaming, boots stomping, glass breaking. She heard herself yelling, begging, pleading. She opened her eyes. It was just her now, and the house, and the past. But the silence was different. It was not empty anymore. It was watching, from windows, from across the street. An old man stepped out onto his porch. He nodded at her. He had seen it all. She nodded back. His presence was quiet, but solid. She stepped off the curb and kept walking. Each footstep like a beat in a long-forgotten rhythm. The block curved. A church stood near the corner. Simple. Brick. A banner read Community Justice Forum. Friday, 6 p.m. She made a mental note. She would be there. Not to speak, just to listen. Across the street, a mural had been painted over. Bright blues and reds. It showed hands, brown, black, white, all holding a torch. Not a weapon. Not a gavel. Just light. She smiled. Someone had painted that recently. Someone still believed. Behind her, a door opened. A woman stepped out. Pajamas. Baby on her hip. The woman looked at Mara, then pointed. You're the one, right? From the video? Mara paused. I am. The woman smiled. Not wide, not loud, but real. Good. Took long enough. Then she went back inside. The door clicked shut, but the warmth stayed. Mara reached the end of the block, turned down another street. New buildings, new scaffolding. The city was changing, like it always had. But now people were watching, not just surviving it, shaping it. Across the city, a radio crackled in a patrol car. Unit 47, confirmed body cam is active. Confirmed. New policy. No exceptions. In the precinct, a new poster hung in the briefing room. Accountability is protection. Carl Rayner's photo had been removed from the award wall. Quietly. No ceremony. Just gone. The frame was still there. Empty. A space left open as a reminder. Mara's name was still on the court docket. She was part of other cases now. Witness. Advocate. Sometimes even expert. She had not planned on becoming any of those things. But justice did not ask for resumes. It asked for backbone. And hers had been forged under pressure. In late nights. In cold hearings. In rooms full of eyes that wanted her to sit down. But she had stood. Every time. Across town, a young rookie officer watched Mara's testimony on his phone. He sat in his car. Engine off. Rain tapping gently on the windshield. He watched her stand in court. Watched her voice not shake. He looked down at his badge, then back at the screen, and made a choice to do it differently, to listen before commanding, to see before assuming. Back at home, Mara peeled off her damp coat, hung it on the hook near the door. Her apartment was quiet. Bookshelves lined with case files. Some framed photos. Her brother, her father, both gone. One to the system, one to grief. But both here with her in some way. She lit a candle on the windowsill. The flame danced. Small, but steady. Like her, she sat at her desk again, opened another file, a name she had seen before. A young man, Taz during a traffic stop. No video, just her word and his injuries. But now they were listening. Now things stuck. Now story spread. She picked up her pen, wrote the first line. I was there. I remember. The rest would come. Slowly, steadily. The truth always did. And this time, it would be heard. The pages before her filled slowly. Each word etched with care. Not for drama, but for precision. The truth had no need for embellishment. It was sharp on its own. She flipped to the next page. A photo slid out. A boy, eyes swollen, split lip. His file had been closed, resisting arrest. That was all it said. No context, no accountability. Mara looked at the photo for a long moment, then slipped it back in. She would reopen that case. Someone needed to. The phone on her desk buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. Thank you. You gave me the courage to speak. No name, no details, but it was enough. She turned to the wall behind her. Pinned on a corkboard were dozens of names. Dates, case numbers. Each one connected by red thread. Each one part of the same system. The same silence. But now, the silence was unraveling. Bit by bit, across the city, a podcast played in a college dorm. Mara's voice, measured, clear. I was not trying to be a hero. I was just trying not to drown. A student listened with headphones. Tears welled in her eyes. She remembered her own cousin. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong skin. Now, maybe his name would mean something again. In another apartment, a father rewound a court video. Watched it with his teenage son. See her, he said softly. She didn't give up. We don't either. The boy nodded. Silent. Change. Somewhere else, an officer opened a locker. Inside, a folded newspaper. Badge of shame. Former Detective Rayner faces grand jury. He closed the locker slowly. Looked at his own badge. Then closed his eyes. Remember the time he said nothing. Watched too much. Stepped back too far. He made a decision then. Tomorrow he would speak. He would tell what he knew. It would cost him, but silence had cost too many already. At the courthouse, another case began. A woman testified. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. I was told no one would believe me, she said. But now I know that is not true. The judge listened. The defense attorney sighed. The room was still, heavy with honesty. Mara sat in the back row. She gave a small nod when the woman stepped down. They had never met, but the bond was there. Truth created its own family, its own revolution. That night, Mara returned to the old neighborhood, not to walk, but to meet. A small group gathered outside the church. Mothers, fathers, brothers, all with stories. Some had wounds, some had questions, but all of them had voices now. Mara stood before them. She did not speak from a podium. She stood level, equal. She said, "Your stories matter." They always did. One by one, they began to speak. Quiet at first, then louder. The dam was breaking. The pain was real, but so was the strength. Across the street, a reporter watched from a car, taking notes, capturing names, preparing to write something honest. Not from the police blotter, not from press releases, but from lived truth, from the streets. The city pulsed with something new. Not rage, not revenge, reckoning, courage. In Carl Rayner's cell, the lights never turned off. He had learned that the hard way. There was no darkness to hide in anymore. Only reflection, only regret. The guards no longer nodded at him. The officers avoided his eyes. He was not a brother, not a hero, just another case number, just another name in a thickening file. He had once said no one could touch him. Now, he could not touch anything, not even the truth. Back in Mara's apartment, a new folder sat on her desk, labeled in black ink, pending witnesses verified. She opened a first file. Inside was a handwritten letter. Miss Kincaid, I saw what they did to my sister. The rest of the letter shook with pain, but it ended with, I'm ready to tell it now. I'm ready to be heard. Mara placed on the board. A new thread stretched across the map. The city's wounds were many, but now they were being mapped, named, faced. In another district, an internal affairs agent stared at a long spreadsheet. A dozen complaints. Same precinct. Same 2 officers. But this time, the complaints would not be filed away. They would be opened, reviewed. The culture was shifting. Slow, loud in some places, silent in others, but shifting. And Mara was not alone anymore. A network had grown. Whispers became statements. Statements became cases. Cases became convictions. And soon, people stopped asking, why now? They started asking, what next? And Mara, she had an answer. Not final, not perfect, but real. We keep going. We keep speaking. We keep watching. And we do not stop until the silence does. The city listened, and for the first time in a long time, it listened well. Mara stepped out into the early morning light. The air was still, almost reverent. The city had not yet woken fully, but it breathed, alive in a new way. She tightened the straps of her bag. Inside it, files, notes, letters, names, memories, and evidence. Truth wrapped in paper. A quiet revolution in ink. She walked past the schoolyard. Children's laughter floated faintly through the fence. It mixed with birdsong and the rustle of leaves in the trees above. A teacher waved at her. Mara smiled in return. That teacher had spoken at the last forum about a student lost in the system. Another one forgotten until now. Not anymore. Not with the records reopened. Not with community watching. She turned the corner and passed the park. On the bench, an older man fed pigeons. He wore a faded military jacket. She had seen him before. Always sitting. Always watching. Today, he nodded. Said, you made them see. That's not small. She nodded back. Still more to see. He smiled. Keep showing him. She walked on, past rows of shops. Graffiti painted over with murals. Not erasing history. Reclaiming it. A barber shop stood with its door open. Inside, a photo of her hung near the cash register. Underneath it, a quote. Justice starts with truth. She had never stepped inside, but she would. Soon. Further down, construction workers paused as she passed. One of them gave a subtle fist over heart. No words, just recognition. She appreciated that more than applause. At the subway, the platform buzzed with commuters. Some glanced her way. Others stared a little longer. One woman leaned over and whispered, thank you. That word followed her like a second name. Not one she chose, but one earned. The train screeched to a halt. She stepped inside, found a seat by the window, pulled out a folder. A case from 2007, sealed too fast. No media coverage. A man with broken ribs, claimed to have fallen. The doctor's note said otherwise. Mara flipped through the records, noted the inconsistencies, the timing, the same officers. One of them had testified in Rayner's defense. Now his name was underlined. The train rattled on. A graffiti tag wall passed by. It read, Believe survivors. Bury silence. She smiled. They were listening. She arrived downtown just after 9. The courthouse loomed again, but it no longer towered over her. She entered through the main doors. The security guards now greeted her with nods. No suspicion. No delay. She flashed her badge. Not a police badge, but one issued to court advocates. A title she never imagined holding. Yet here she was. The waiting room was full. Men and women of all ages. Most anxious. Most silent. She walked through them. Made eye contact. Said their names gently. A young woman stood near the wall, shaking slightly. Her name was Lila. First time testifying. Mara approached. You're not alone, she said. Lila nodded, but her hands stayed clenched. Mara reached into her folder, pulled out a small photo. Carl Rayner, in cuffs. This man thought no one would ever believe me either. Lila stared. Her breath slowed. Then, finally, she whispered, "I'm ready." Together, they entered the courtroom. The judge looked up. A familiar face by now. The bailiff nodded. The defendant sat stiffly. Another officer under investigation. Another one who once laughed in hallways. Another one who thought power meant protection. But the tide had turned. Mara sat beside Lila, gave her a steady glance. Lila walked to the stand, hands trembling, voice cracking, but she spoke, and the room listened. Every word, every pause, was a strike against the silence. When Lila finished, Mara stood, wrapped her arms around her. Lila cried softly, but they were not tears of fear. They were release. Out in the hallway, reporters waited, but Mara held the door for Lila. Let her pass first. Let her breathe. This was her moment, her truth, and it was finally heard. That night, Mara returned home late. The street outside her apartment was quiet, still damp from a recent rain. The city slept lighter these days, with less to hide. She kicked off her shoes, lit her candle. It burned brighter tonight. She picked up the next folder, read the name aloud, then whispered, "I see you." Every story she opened was a promise. Every testimony was a door kicked open. And as long as she had breath, she would keep opening them. In another part of the city, a new mural went up overnight. Spray paint, brushes, voices in color. It showed a woman standing in a courtroom, her fist at her side, a scale behind her, balanced. Finally, underneath, 3 words, "Truth does echo." And echo it did, through courtrooms, through precincts, through memory, through time, because Mara knew justice was not just a destination. It was a practice, a stubborn, relentless practice, and she had no plans of stopping, not until every silence spoke, and every shadow stood in the light. In the weeks that followed, the courthouse halls changed. Fewer whispers, more names spoken aloud, more survivors stepping forward, more silence broken. Mara walked those halls daily now, not as a visitor, but as a force. The clerk at room 317 smiled when he saw her. He used to avert his eyes. Now, he stood when she entered. Respect had replaced reluctance. Inside that room, 3 more witnesses waited. 2 young men, 1 elderly woman, all with stories that intersected. She greeted each with warmth, offered them water, tissues, time. Their nerves were familiar, so was their fear. But now they had something else too. Permission to be heard. She guided them through the process, step by step. No pressure, just power. When the door opened and the court officer called the first name, the young man stood tall, voice steady, eyes forward. The judge leaned in. The defense scribbled furiously. The truth landed like a weight. And Mara watched, unmoving, steady, present. Back at the precinct across town, change was grinding forward. Old photos came down. New protocols went up. The code of silence cracked and began to crumble. The new police chief, a woman named Tanya Ellis, stood at the podium one crisp morning. "Our mission is not control," she said. "It is service. It is truth. It is earned trust." Reporters clicked their cameras. Activists folded their arms. They had heard promises before. But Ellis mentioned Mara by name, said she had reshaped the city's spine, called her a civic sentinel. Mara watched the clip from her phone, alone in her kitchen, sipping cold tea. She smirked, then turned it off, back to the files, because the work never waited. It multiplied. It swarmed. In her inbox, new stories arrived daily, some frantic, some long and aching, some typed from hospital beds, some from prison. Each one had a name, a place, a moment when the system turned away. But Mara was facing them, one by one. She reopened a file from 4 years ago. A teenager tackled during a mistaken stop. Wrong hoodie, wrong block. The video footage had been lost, but the officer's report contradicted witnesses. 3 now agreed to testify. She scheduled the hearing herself, contacted the city's civil review board. It was no longer buried. Outside the courthouse that day, a protest formed. Peaceful, organized, holding signs that said, "Say their names. Speak the silence." Mara was right. She did not join them. She did not need to. Her work was inside. That hearing lasted 4 hours. Voices rose. Truth clashed with denial. When it ended, the officer was suspended, pending further investigation. But the teenager's name was cleared, his record expunged. His mother wept. Mara held her hand. Tightly, quietly. Later that evening, she returned to her apartment. Mail waited by the door. One envelope stood out. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. Carl Rayner, in a prison jumpsuit, staring at the wall. Below it, a typed note. Some prisons are made of bars. Some of mirrors. I hope you never stop holding them up. No signature. But Mara recognized the tone. A former officer. Perhaps one who once stood beside Rayner. Now waking up, she placed a note in a drawer. Not as a trophy, as a marker. Another step forward. Another ripple. The next morning, she attended a meeting at City Hall. Policy reform. New proposals. Body cam footage review by civilian panels. Mandatory de-escalation training. Early intervention for repeated complaints. She sat at the head of the table. No longer the outsider. Now the catalyst. They asked for her insights. She gave facts. Dates. Patterns. When they hesitated, she stared. Not with anger, with conviction. And the vote passed. Unanimously. As she exited, a young intern caught up to her. Said, "My father was always scared to speak. You made it possible for me." Mara nodded. Then speak loud. The intern smiled. Ran back inside. That night, the local news led with the headline. Citizen advocate changes city policy again. But Mara was not watching. She was on a rooftop, overlooking the neighborhood where it began. The boarded house had finally been torn down. In its place, a community garden, funded by donations, started by neighbors, a mural painted along the fence, not of Mara, but of hands, hundreds of hands, raised, not clenched. Children played there now, their laughter loud, unapologetic. Mara inhaled the summer air, felt the city breathing deeper. Behind her, her phone buzzed again. A new email, subject line, "I'm ready to talk." She clicked it open, started reading, and smiled. The silence was shrinking, line by line, voice by voice, step by relentless step. And she would be there for all of it, until the last lie fell, until the last badge hid nothing, until every name was known, and every story. Finally believed. The sun set slow over the skyline. Burnt orange faded to deep violet. The city exhaled. For once, it did not feel heavy, just still. Mara stood at the edge of the rooftop garden. Children's voices had gone quiet. Porch lights flickered on across the street. Windows glowed with soft warmth. She watched as one family gathered for dinner. Laughter echoed through their open window. It reminded her of a time before all of this, before truth became her calling, before justice became personal. She sat on the low stone wall, pulled out her notebook, not a case file, not a statement, just a blank page. She began to write, slowly, deliberately. You were right to speak. You were brave to believe your voice mattered, and you were never alone. She closed the notebook gently, placed it in her bag. This was not the end of the work, but it was the end of something, the end of being unheard, the end of the untouchable badge. Behind her, the mural shimmered under lamplight, hands still raised, still reaching, not in desperation, but in unity. She stood, stretched, breathed in the scent of soil and late summer. Tomorrow would bring more stories, more names, more truth. But tonight belonged to quiet victory, to healing, to grace. She walked down the steps of the garden, back into the rhythm of the city she had helped reawaken, and as the door closed behind her, The silence, once deafening, stayed gone,